Hello, and welcome to Hershey All Things Diversity's event. My name is Taylor Rolls, and I want to thank you for tuning in to today's topic, Mental Health Matters, Cultivating Community Awareness. Hershey All Things Diversity is a free series of programs to create awareness and promote acceptance and inclusion in our community. It is coordinated by representatives from Derry Township, the Hershey Story Museum, Derry Township School District, Milton Hershey School, the Hershey Company, Penn State Health, Hershey Entertainment Resorts, and Hershey Trust Company. The events are sponsored in part by the Hershey Company, Hershey Entertainment Resorts, Milton Hershey School, Penn State Health, and the Giant Company. Tonight, we are pleased to have a panel of speakers here to share with you more on this important topic. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat on YouTube, and we will share them with our speakers at the end of the presentation. At this time, I will invite Beth Shaw to kick off today's discussion.
Great, thank you, Taylor. Welcome, everyone. I am Beth Shaw. I am a psychologist, and I've been working at Milton Hershey School for 30 years, and I am on the committee for the Derry Township All Things Diversity. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so it's a great opportunity to provide this evening's panel session for you. This evening, the panelists will cover a range of topics related to mental health. We hope that you find this evening informative and walk away with at least one idea to implement in helping others or in cultivating your own mental health. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nikisha to introduce herself.
Hi, thank you, Beth. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nikisha Kenny Futrell. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and also a professor at Messiah University. I'm the owner of Elevated Mental Health Services. It's an outpatient clinic in Stilton, Pennsylvania. I'm so excited to be here to share my knowledge and also to gain, to my own knowledge as well. So thank you for having me. And I'll pass it on to Amanda.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here with us to discuss this important topic. I'm Amanda Valentine, and I'm a school psychologist at Derry Township School District. I primarily support the elementary school students and have been working with the district since 2008. I have my educational leadership degree from Penn State, and I specialize in autism and social, emotional, and behavioral disorders. With that, I will pass it to Christine.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Christine Capuzzo, and I am a licensed professional counselor, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I work at the Milton Hershey School with our senior division kids. So that's grades 9 through 12. I have a master's degree of counseling psychology from Fordham University and a certificate from Shippensburg University in couples, marriage, and family counseling, and over 20 years in doing in offering services to adults and children. And I'm thrilled to be here this evening. Thank you. And I will kick it off to Dave. My apologies, Dave.
No problem, Christine. Hi, I'm Dave Lillenstein. I'm a school psychologist at Derry Township School District. I've been in the school district since 2002, and this is my 29th year as a school psychologist. I earned my doctorate in school psychology with a concentration in family school relations from IUP. And my position in the district is that I am assigned to the high school. So I work with grades 9 through 12. And then I also work with K through 12 for gifted support and emotional support. So my role is largely dealing with mental health and helping students to remove some of the barriers to their learning. I'll turn it over to Chris now.
Right, thank you, David. I'm Chris Rich, and I'm the Senior Manager of Student Health Services here in the elementary school at Milton Hershey School. I work with kids pre-K through 4th grade, and I'm very lucky to be with this esteemed group of people, and very grateful that you tuned in today to talk about mental health matters. So with that, I'm the last panelist to introduce myself, so we're going to go ahead and jump into the screen. So give me a second to get our screen set up here, and this all works. There we go. Excellent. Can you see my screen? And is it in presenter mode or is it in regular mode? Okay, good. All right, excellent. So this works. I like it. So the topic 2 screens going. All right, the topic today is mental health matters, cultivating community awareness of mental health. We felt like it was really important to have this discussion with the community about why mental health matters and why it's important and how we could help each other with our own mental health and well-being here. So with that, I'm going to change the slide here. A couple things that just friendly reminders we have. Make sure that you turn off your cameras. Feel free to type in any questions, and that the questions will be answered at the end. So we'll have a question and answer period at the end where we'll have a chance to dialogue with each other and with the audience and get a chance to get your questions as well. So when we look at tonight, is what we'd like to accomplish is that first of all, we'll start with a video called Under the Surface, and just kind of puts things in perspective about we all have our own struggles and things that we need to manage, and that we don't always see that in each other. And so just kind of cultivating awareness that each of us have our own struggles and that we need to be sensitive to that as we interact with each other. We're going to talk about what mental health is, how to define mental health, how to understand it, how we can kind of cultivate kind of an awareness of mental health. Look at the signs and symptoms. Take some look at the prevalence and some statistics around how mental health affects the communities around us. We're going to talk about assumptions, what assumptions are in place and how that can limit us as far as when we decide to help somebody. How to find support and how to give support as a partner to people in the community, to friends, family members, to promote mental wellness, to talk about barriers and resources. And then lastly, we're going to move from hopelessness to hopefulness, so that people that struggle with mental health feel oftentimes alone and isolated and feel like that there's nowhere to go. And so we wanted to give people a sense of hope and a sense that things will get better and that there are lots of resources out there to help people with their mental wellness. So with that, I'm going to turn, we have a short video, and the video starts with this quote that really was powerful to me, is that you only understand people if you could feel them inside yourself. So when we think about empathy, we think about kind of developing a sense of feeling of each other and feeling what's going on around us and people that we interact with every day. So let's watch the video. This is going to happen. We practiced this a couple times, but I'm just going to switch to the video itself here. I think I have it queued up. All right. Let's set the stage. This, I think, is very reminiscent of communities that we're in every day as we walk in through our job sites, through grocery store, the person's checking us out. We don't know what they're going through and what struggles they have. And so we just need to develop that empathy as we interact with our colleagues and our friends, our family members, understand that there's a whole nother world going on beneath the surface. And that's why we think it's important to talk about why mental health matters. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to my esteemed colleague, David, to help us to understand mental health a little better. David, take it away.
Thanks, Chris. What a powerful video. It's something that we all deal with sometimes on a daily basis, it seems. And the image of the iceberg is so true. What we often see is not really what is truly present or what others are dealing with. Before we get too much into the presentation, I think it would be helpful if we all have an understanding of what mental health is as a definition, and we have a common definition from which we work for the rest of the presentation. So the question is, what is mental health? Next slide. Actually, let's keep it on this slide. So mental health involves a person's psychological, social, and emotional well-being. It includes our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And we often think of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in a triangle. And in fact, in schools, we teach that. Mental health is impacted by a lot of things. It's impacted by our genetics, our family. It's impacted by our experiences in life, and also what's going around in our environment around us. Other people and their actions can impact our mental health. It's a state of mind. You can see there, is it a state of mind? Yes, it is a state of mind, which impacts how we then handle stress, interact with others, and make choices. When we have good mental health, we have a positive sense of self, and we have functional coping mechanisms. We are able to then handle the common life stressors, because life is something that is stressful for all of us at different times. And then we're able to function well in daily life. It's important to keep in mind that mental health is variable, and it can fluctuate within a day, from day to day, month to month, year to year, and our mental health is fluid. And I think that's most important to keep in mind as we work through this presentation, because we're going to be ending on what can we do to improve mental health. And there are things that we can do to improve mental health. Okay, next slide. So what are some signs that there are some issues with our mental health? Some questions that we may want to ask ourselves, have we felt any of these? Has there been any kind of a change in our eating behavior? Are we eating too much? Are we eating too little? Has there been a change? Are we observing that in other people? Are we observing that others have changed their eating habits? Our energy level is also an indication that something could be going awry in our mental health. Having too much energy, having too little energy, either one can be an indication. If we're feeling, or if we're noticing that somebody else is feeling unusually confused or on edge or scared, sometimes people say paranoid, that can be an indication that something isn't quite right with someone's mental health. This one is maybe a little bit extreme, but is also an indication that we might look for. And that's if we or somebody else are hearing voices or believing things that are not true. That's definitely a sign that there could be an issue with their mental health. And finally, on this slide, if there's an inability to perform daily tasks, so something is getting in the way of one's ability to perform daily tasks, whether it's their job, their school, or other daily tasks that we all have during a day, that's a good indication. I like to think of it as excesses. So is something that we are observing in ourselves or others either too much or too little? So for example, sleep. Too little sleep can be an indication, but so can too much sleep. If somebody is avoiding life or avoiding work by sleeping, or they're working too much by not sleeping and never leaving work, that can be an indication. I talked about food a moment ago. If somebody's eating habits either change to be where they're eating too much food or too little food, then that can be an indication. Concentration, again, same thing. If somebody is having difficulty concentrating, that can be an indication that there's something going on. However, it can also be a concern if somebody is overly concentrating and not able to be flexible in what they do, or to be able to shift what they do. And happiness, if somebody is what we often think of as sad or depressed, that could be an indication of concern. However, if somebody is overly happy, that can be an indication of concern. And one of the things that we often look for in the students that we work with, if we notice that a student is pretty flat most of the time, and then all of a sudden they come around us and they're extremely elated and they seem to be the life of the party, and that's out of character for them, that's actually not necessarily a reason to celebrate. That may be a reason to be concerned. And so again, when we're looking at excesses or behaviors that are out of the norm, that is a reason for us to maybe question whether or not mental health is in a good place. I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Shaw, and she's going to talk a little bit about prevalence and statistics related to mental health.
My apologies, I was still on mute. Thank you, Dave. This first chart that I have for you identifies the prevalence of depression, anxiety, and behavior disorders by age ranges in children and adolescents. Those are the three most common mental health conditions for our children and teens. And you can see the prevalence based on the bar charts as they go by percentages based on our entire population. The note at the bottom, I really want to call to your attention. This was even prior to the pandemic. The CDC determined that 1 out of every 5 children had a mental health condition. So if you have a classroom of 25 children, or you've got a community event or a practice field for soccer, if you have 25 children, you can expect probably 5 of them are dealing with mental health conditions. And what is even more distressing is of those 5 children, only 1 is probably receiving treatment from a mental health professional. So there's also emerging evidence that suggests that the pandemic has served as an accelerator of sorts for this already pre-existing mental health crisis. It not only created more conditions of distress for all of us, but it also has limited access to services. 10 years prior to the pandemic, from 2009 to 2019, there was a 40% increase among children and teens reporting persistent feelings of depression, suicidal thoughts, and behaviors. And current trends, the data are suggesting that is continuing. There's a continued increase in depression, trauma, self-injurious behaviors, and suicidal thoughts. And some study findings have found that depression and anxiety symptoms have doubled since the pandemic. In 2021, the U.S. Surgeon General's Advisory issued a report titled Protecting Youth Mental Health. It provides data and status of the pandemic's impact on children and teens as of 2021. It really is an important read for people interested in learning about the differential impact of the pandemic and the mediating factors that contribute to the growing national youth mental health crisis. It also provides a call to action of recommendations that all of us can consider doing and engaging to help address this ever-growing national concern. So Chris, if you'll advance the next slide. The next 2 slides are data from the National Alliance of Mental Health. This first slide, it's a very busy slide, so I'm going to call out just a few data points. The left-hand side are some data points for adolescents ages 12 to 17. 3 million have been experiencing suicidal ideation. And since the pandemic, there's been a 31% increase in mental health visits to the emergency departments. On the right-hand side are young adults, ages 18 to 25. Currently, 1 in 3 are experiencing a mental illness, and 3.8 million have experienced suicidal ideation. And for both of these groups, there's documented evidence that there's been an increase in alcohol and drug use to cope with mental health challenges. It's a form of self-medication to deal with symptoms of distress. The CDC and other reliable research organizations have been reporting consistent findings that the pandemic has truly further negatively impacted mental health conditions, particularly among our adolescent females. Emergency department visits significantly have increased for depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, and disordered eating. One study that was released just this week has shown that there's been a doubling of the number of female adolescents who've been diagnosed with an eating disorder. Chris, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Adults' mental health continues to be of concern as well. 1 in 5 adults are experiencing mental illnesses, and more than 12 million have experienced suicidal ideation. This chart also highlights the challenges adults are having with access to mental health services. 17.7 million have experienced delays or cancellations of mental health service appointments. And 4.9 million of our adults in this country simply have been unable to access needed services. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikisha to provide some additional prevalence data.
Thank you. And I just wanted to pause for a minute because I was also monitoring the chat a little bit. And before we move like too far in, there was a few questions that I think that David or Beth or anybody may be able to answer. One of them was, it says mental health is often seen as different from physical health, but it is important to see that health is interrelated and any issues need to be treated properly. What are your thoughts about this?
Nikisha, I was actually going to speak to that a bit later in the presentation when we get to the ripple effect. Yeah, so if that person can just hold on and I'll be happy to address that. I don't know, Dave, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I'll let you address it later, and then if I have anything to add, I'll chime in.
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. I just didn't want to go too far without anyone's questions being unanswered. And the same person did write 2 more questions, but I do know that we're going to cover some of those ones later on in the presentation as well. So moving forward, I just wanted to highlight just some significant facts about BIPOC population, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So just to be clear, according to the most recent census, our U.S. population is about 60% identify as white, 12.2% identify as Black, and 18.5% Hispanic, and then there are others as well. But I just wanted to highlight the top 3 demographics. So with that being in mind, with 12% of our population identifying as Black, we're looking at 1 out of 5, the same as whites, who identify as having a mental health concern. So Blacks are about 35% likely to have a mental health issue. When it comes to suicide, it says in 2019, suicide was the 2nd leading cause of death of Black or African American ages 15 to 24. And also just to highlight, because when I read that, I was like, okay, well, if that's a second, what is the 1st leading cause of death of Black and African American ages 15 to 24? I don't know if you guys can guess what that is, but it's actually homicide. Homicide is number 1. And out of homicide, it says that Blacks are 3 times more likely to be fatally shot by police as well. While Blacks make up 12% of the population, they were victims in 61% of all gun violence. And those are pretty alarming numbers. For Native Americans or Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, ages 15 to 24, suicide was the leading cause of death in that category. So when we talk about does mental health matter, yes, it matters, not just to the mass population, but to all of us. Black Americans live below the federal poverty poverty guidelines are 2 times as likely to report serious psychological stress as those living 2 times above. And then also keeping in mind, remember that Blacks only make up about 12% of the US population. Out of that, the Black community, 40% of the Black population, or 40% of the homeless population is Black or African American. And out of that population of homeless, 50% identify as having a mental health issue. 50% of the prison population identifies themselves as Black or identifies themselves as African American. And out of that, I have another statistic that says approximately half of the people in U.S. jails and over 1/3 of the population of U.S. prisons have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. And when it comes to foster care, it says 45% of the children in the foster care system identify as Black or African American, okay? And another statistic about foster care says up to 80% of the children in foster care have significant mental health issues, compared to approximately 18 to 22% of the general population. So those are really alarming numbers. On mixed and multiracial adults, there's 35.8% experience mental illness, which is the largest percentage of any group question. In 2019, the death rates and suicide in American Indian, Alaskan Native females ages 15 to 19 were more than 5 times higher than that of white females of the same age to commit suicide. Could you turn to the next slide, please? So why is this happening? Why is this such I would call it an epidemic, because, the amount and the increase of, people suffering from mental illness of all colors and races, shapes and sizes, but definitely just to focus right now on the BIPOC population. One historical fact is the mistrust in the medical and mental institutions. It has deep roots in the Black community, the mistrust of healthcare. And we can go on and on about what those experiments were and what that looked like. But if you do your research, there has been proven historical context that definitely highlights the mistrust in the healthcare of Black people. As a result, also racism, Black people are at an increased risk of developing psychosis, in part due to high amounts of chronic stress and trauma. So stress plays a crucial role in our mental health, and that includes racial stress and racial trauma. Racial trauma can increase the risk of people of color meeting the criteria for PTSD as well. And you also have to consider microaggressions as a form of racial trauma as well. So lack of access to quality healthcare is also a concern. And a lot of times people will say, well, that doesn't exist anymore. People can have access to whatever they want. It's available, but that's not accurate at all. And I can use this context. And this is a story that kind of puts it in context for you. So my daughter likes seaweed chips, right? I know she likes seaweed chips. And the only time you can actually find that in a grocery store is if you have a grocery store that actually has a health food section or organic section. Not every grocery store has those particular, lanes or categories or options of food choices. So if you go to Harrisburg, and I know I live in Harrisburg, if I go to a certain grocery store in Harrisburg, like a Giant's on this side of town, they don't have a healthy food organic section. They have what they call it's mixed and integrated into the regular shopping aisles, but they don't have a particular area full with organic stuff like they may have on Progress Road, So my point is, although it may be available in some places, it's not accessible everywhere, right? So I may want a certain type of treatment and it may not be available in my neighborhood, or I may have to settle for, this service versus this. So more than 80% of Black and African Americans are very concerned about the stigma associated with mental health. And that's actually pretty accurate in a lot of different families. If you go to a counselor or if you're diagnosed with a mental health disorder, something must be wrong with you. You must have, you may be like in the basement, or you need to be up and attic, you need to be away from the family. So that stigma of having a disorder makes you different, right? It makes us odd, it makes us untouchable, or a disease of some sort. So there's still a lot of stigma in the Black community about asking and receiving help, especially for mental health. Lack of cultural understanding by healthcare providers may also contribute to undiagnosis and misdiagnosis of mental health. A lot of times Black people and people of color will often say and explain their mental health symptoms as physical symptoms. For example, I may have individuals come in here that identify as a BIPOC population and say, I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I feel heavy. I just feel, like tired. It's a lot of it's physical symptoms. I just can't keep my eyes open. I just feel so much pressure. I feel off balance. So in other words, it's anxiety, it's depression. There's other things that are going on, but they're identifying them as physical symptoms. So that also, if that's not understood by a medical provider, they're often misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. Oh, well, maybe it's just your high blood pressure. Yes, I may have high blood pressure, but the root of this is my stress. And stress is actually very much preventable, and I don't always need a medication for stress. There are some things that I can do for my stress, just making little changes in my lifestyle to, cooperate with that, and also to help lower my blood pressure. So cultural understanding is also a lack in a mental health profession.
Keisha, before we move on, if I may ask a question, is there a resource that people of color, BIPOC population can use to find a provider that is more culturally competent?
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you said that, because a lot of people do sometimes want a therapist that they can relate to. And sometimes when they say relate, it means like I identify with them, whether they live in the same community, maybe we look the same, maybe I want a female. And it is sometimes kind of hard. Like, how do I locate a Black therapist if I want a Black therapist? So gratefully, in Central Pennsylvania, we do have a website. It's called Black Therapists of Central PA. If you Google that, it's basically like a great resource where you can see a list of therapists and you can find out what they specialize in, where they're located, and all of these therapists identify with the BIPOC community. So that is a great resource that anybody can use.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and I will pass it back over to Beth.
All right. Thank you, Nikisha. I'm just going to spend a little time on the ripple effect, and this will also hopefully respond to the question in the chat. Certainly, we know from an individual perspective that mental health conditions can have an impact on the individual. However, mental health conditions can also impact one's physical health conditions. So for those individuals who have mental health conditions, they can be at increased risk for cardiovascular conditions. They can also be at risk for type 2 diabetes. There's also an increased risk for substance use and abuse. So this really can complicate the provision of health care when we think about highly complex. And when I get in a minute to kind of call to action, what are some suggestions? There are some recommendations for healthcare providers from that perspective. But from the individual, as Dave had mentioned, dealing with a mental health condition can impact your activities of daily life. For adults, it can mean work absenteeism. For children and teens, it can impact school attendance and performance. For all of us, it can impact our personal relationships, and it can affect those activities that tend to bring us joy and well-being. Now, what's the impact on a family? For a family that has anyone who may be dealing with a mental health illness, we now have to think about daily supports. What does that family members need to do in order to help care for that individual? Do they need to take them to appointments and do follow-up care? What about potential safety concerns within the home? How do you manage that from a 24 hours a day perspective for those who are thinking about suicide? It may require family members to take time off of work. It may mean a loss of income. And it also may mean stepping out and working with your school personnel if you have children or teens dealing with mental health challenges to access additional supports. From the community perspective, $99 billion are spent annually in the United States in related costs, all associated with just depression alone. $99 billion. Nikisha already shared some of the homelessness rates. For the general population, approximately 20% of people who are homeless have a mental health condition. Approximately 70% of all youth in our juvenile justice system have a mental health condition. So from a world perspective, the United States, it's kind of interesting where we rank. The US News recently released a report. The United States ranks first globally among substance abuse disorders. We rank 16th in the world for anxiety disorders, and we rank 29th in the world for depressive disorders. But that's not the end of the story. We really need to think about what can we all do to surround members of our community for supports. And the rest of the presentation is all really going to be more about that. But I just want to quickly re-reference a couple suggestions from, again, the 2021 US Surgeon General report. For an individual, ask for help. If you're dealing with mental health challenges, learn and practice strategies to manage your stress. Be intentional about social media use and take care of both mind and body, and find ways to serve and be in support of others. For families who have members in their family who are dealing with mental health challenges, serve as role models. Take care of your own mental and physical well-being. Understand and look for warning signs. And if you have children and teens, encourage and build healthy relationships with their peer groups, and make sure you have strong and safe relationships with your children and teens, and ensure that they are accessing regular well child and all their checkups and preventative health services, and be attentive to the amount of time they spend online. For communities, schools create positive, safe, and affirming environments. Offer a continuum of evidence-based supports. Healthcare organizations regularly screen for mental health risk factors, and use disciplinary teams for those highly complex patients that have both mental health and physical health conditions. And for community organizations and houses of faith, ensure staff are trained and knowledgeable about warning signs and symptoms, and understand how to build authentic supports and relationships, and make sure that everyone is promoting belongingness to everyone. And then finally, for employers, for those of you who manage companies, is there an EAP in place for employees? Does the workplace culture affirm the importance of mental health and well-being for all employees and their families? Are mental health conditions treated the same as physical health conditions through your policies and practices? And I would encourage all to regularly assess an employee's sense of well-being within their workplace. So there is much that we can do to help address the mental health challenges among our members of our community. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Christine.
Thank you, Beth. Next slide, please. So the Oxford Learner's Dictionary defines the word assumption as a belief or a feeling that something's true or that something will happen when there's no real proof. You can go on to the next slide, please, Chris. Assumptions derive from our core beliefs about ourselves, the world, and the people with whom we surround ourselves with. When we make assumptions about a person, it can lead to outcomes we did not necessarily intend. Next slide, please. Making assumptions is akin to judging someone while being blindfolded. Common assumptions about hidden disabilities and mental health come in so many forms. It's easy to presume and make judgments when we don't take the time to understand. Having the courage to kindly inquire, show interest, and connect with each other removes potential harm of what assumptions can create. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at some common assumptions about hidden disabilities and mental health. The first one here, that medication alone will fix my depression or anxiety. That kind of an assumption is equally dangerous for the person with the mental illness and for the person who support the person with the mental illness. As a society, we tend to look for quick and easy fixes to our challenges, but tending to our mental health is not the same as going through a drive-through at a fast food restaurant. It just simply isn't. People are not broken. They need the opportunity to learn to work through or to sit with intense emotional responses, and the opportunity to work through the underlying issues that may be related to those intense emotional responses. The notion that they should have more control, an assumption often made when we witness a person having an intense emotional outburst, or a depressive episode, or a manic episode, or know that when a person is struggling with addiction. Very easy assumption to make. The idea that people with mental illness are more violent is simply just incorrect. There was a great article published in 2022 in the Journal of American Psychological Association, volume 52. The researchers found that there's multiple factors that contribute to a person acting out violently. Some of the factors that were outlined by the article indicated that people who live in neighborhoods that are unsafe, those who live below the poverty level, those that live in high crime areas, they're all contributing factors that can lead to the potential for violence. Having a mental illness does not mean a person will be violent. People with mental illnesses are more often the victims of violent crimes than the perpetrators. The idea that grief should only last so long or be overcome is another assumption we tend to very easily make. Grief is not something to be overcome. It's an experience to be tended to, not to be overcome. And finally, when we ask the person why are you late to work? Are they caring for an elderly parent? Do they have a child with special needs? Are they up late at night worried about a child with a drug addiction? Very kindly, stick to the facts and ask a simple question. A simple question like, I notice you're often late to work. Do you need any help or resources? Demonstrating care and concern in this situation can help lead a person to valuable and supportive resources, like an employer's FMLA plan or local community resources. This approach, it really sends a very clear message of care and concern. At the end of this presentation, we will be providing a list of resources right here within our local community. And now I'm going to turn it over to Amanda.
Thanks so much, Christine. I think the commentary on assumptions and reflecting on assumptions is such an important thing for each one of us to engage in, because the assumptions that we have and that we hold with regards to other people affect how we treat them and how we engage with them, and even how we offer support to them. Our assumptions can guide whether we move towards them or whether we create distance and move away. And that can even increase feelings of hopelessness or loneliness for people who are already struggling. So I think each of us giving consideration to our own assumptions is really important, especially when we want to serve in a helping or supportive role. People who are struggling with mental health challenges really need a well-designed network of support. And each of us has the opportunity to be a part of that support, but not one of us alone can provide all of the support that someone may need. So I would like you guys to take a minute, those who are listening tonight and the panelists who we have together, take a minute and give consideration to this question. When you're struggling, what does support look like for you? How do you prefer to be supported? Let's talk about that for a minute. I'd like to hear from the panelists that are with us tonight.
You know, Amanda, for me, support can be hard to accept.
Yeah.
But when I need support, honestly, the first thing I need is a hug, is that physical contact. And then somebody who will actually listen
Yeah.
and not just dish me out a bunch of advice, right?
Yeah.
So-
So I hear you saying it can be hard to ask for help. There's a vulnerability in asking for help that can be really, really difficult to overcome. But
Yeah.
for you, when you do need that support, that physical content and a listening ear are the things that really help you to feel supported.
Yeah.
Mhm. And I just want to piggyback on that. I think it also depends on your love language. You know, when you said you need a hug to feel supported, you know, I may just need some words of affirmation, you know, like you were made for this. Even, you know, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, whatever it is that you can affirm with. So that to me is support. Just, it could just be words. Doesn't necessarily have to be the hug, but just the encouragement and some true words.
I would also add
Really
to
points out the difference between what you might like, what each of us individually, we're all very different. We all need something very different.
David, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to add a little bit more language to the listening. I think listening is something that's helpful, but also non-judgmental listening. You know, someone to just give an ear, and maybe I want answers. But I also like when somebody approaches me and says, "Are you okay? You know, you look a little tired, or you look a little quiet. You know, you were kind of quiet at the meeting today. Is everything going okay?" You know, I'm someone who's okay with someone approaching me, and especially if it's someone who knows me. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind with mental illness, is that, you know, oftentimes it's that iceberg, and there's an awful lot below the surface. And some of us have a good poker face and some of us don't. And if we work with colleagues that we know, it's okay to approach your colleague and to say, "Hey, you were kind of quiet today. Is everything okay?"
Yeah, so as I listen to the responses provided so far, I hear one person who needs a hug and a listening ear. I hear another person who wants encouragement and words of affirmation. And then David just shared with us that for him, it's important to be seen and for people to check in and to notice that he's struggling. And I think as we move into talking about supporting and partnering with those who are struggling with mental health issues, it's so important for us to remember that support can look many, many different ways. And all of my life growing up, I was told the golden rule is the way you should live your life. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. But when we really give to consideration to what support looks like, it's not a one-size-fits-all model, and it's not what matters to me. It's what the other person needs. And most recently in a training at some point over the course of the last year, I heard someone reference the platinum rule. And the platinum rule says, treat other people or support other people the way that they would like to be treated. So how do we know this unless we ask? So when we're moving into a supportive or helping role, one of the things that we always want to do is empower the other person and give them voice and choice to ask for what they need if they're able to do that. Thanks, you guys, for sharing those thoughts with us this evening. That was really helpful. We want to go back to the slide. And we can advance. There are so many people struggling with mental health concerns. There are also so many people who want to help and to be a support. So we wanted to share with you this evening some important helping reminders. First and foremost, David spoke with us earlier about recognizing the signs of mental health concerns and speaking up. When we step into a helping role, that can be a little bit overwhelming because we're uncertain about what to say or what to do to know the right way to support. And what I want to encourage those of you listening to remember tonight is it's better to say the wrong thing than to say nothing at all. And the reason I say that is because you can always clarify your intentions. You can always ask for forgiveness. But what you can't do is recreate a missed opportunity if somebody really needed you to show care and concern for them in that moment. In one of my professional courses, one of my college courses, I remember one of my professors showed us a video about a man who was struggling with suicidality. And he told his self-narrative, and he shared that for weeks he had been struggling with mental health. And every single day, he hoped that someone who crossed his path would ask him if he was okay. But day after day, he went through his life recognizing how intensely he was struggling without anyone showing that interest. And on the day, he had decided that the following day was the last day of his life. And he was taking public transportation to the San Francisco Bay Bridge in California. And he decided the only thing that would prevent him from jumping off that bridge was if someone would see him and ask him, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" And that has stuck with me ever since. It's probably been 25 years since I came across that story. The power of noticing someone and offering to be a support and a listening ear can change and does affect lives and outcomes for people who are struggling with mental health issues. So take the risk to say the wrong thing rather than saying nothing at all. When you're in a supportive role, we also want to encourage connection with professional resources. This is so important because, as we've mentioned, there's a ripple effect on families, schools, communities that is quite extensive. And one person alone typically cannot provide the intensity of support that someone who's really struggling needs. So we want to encourage conversations with people by asking them if they have the supports that they need, and by reminding them that supports are available. We want to keep supports open and give consideration to all of the different things that somebody might need to create a supportive web. So, for example, who are the specialists in your community who support people who are struggling with anxiety or depression or some other mental health condition? Are there support groups that are run within churches or other areas that you could access? Are there people who you could connect with to be a sponsor, who serve as a daily check-in for you, to help you to engage in the activities to keep you on a positive track? Is there a psychiatrist who can support you in accessing medication management? Have you secured a therapist? So when you're in a supporting role, you want to remember the limitations of your role. And one of the things that you want to avoid is taking on responsibility for the person who's struggling, because the person who is struggling is going to have to do this heavy work, but we want them to do it within an interconnected web where they are supported in all of the ways that empower them to be well. Thirdly, and we've touched on this through some comments by a couple of the presenters, we want to ensure that we're listening without judgment. I know David mentioned this when he shared about what he needs to feel supported. And when we say judgment, we often think about condemning what someone's doing. And judgment can look a lot of different ways when it comes to somebody who's struggling with their mental health. Judgment might look like or sound like blaming. Well, it's your fault. You continue this pattern of behavior. We want to avoid that. Blaming doesn't promote action to do something different. It does promote shame within the person. So we want to avoid blaming. We want to avoid doubting what they're saying. We want to avoid minimizing and saying things like, oh, you know, you're a teenager. Everybody goes through this. Everybody goes through this. Sometimes we take things personally and we make it more about ourselves and an issue that they've triggered in us instead of the person who's really struggling. Or just being generally dismissive. These are the types of things that don't necessarily help. So our goal is to listen without judgment. And to be completely honest, we could probably do an entire 1.5-hour series just on what listening without judgment looks like and sounds like. So if you have interest in learning more about that, I would encourage you to Google the term active listening. Because when you Google active listening, you're going to learn a lot about what it means to paraphrase, to give someone 100% of your time and attention, to demonstrate empathy for what they're going through, to ask questions and ask for clarification. These are the kinds of things that will help people to be willing to take the risk to share that they're struggling. These are the kinds of things that will create an environment in which people feel safe to be able to ask for what they need. One thing I want to mention before we go on to the next slide that I don't feel that I've said directly and explicitly enough, and I want to make sure that I do say it with intention. Under number 1 on this slide, we spoke about it's better to say the wrong thing than to say nothing at all. One of the things that people often hesitate to ask is, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Do you have thoughts of killing yourself? And it's so, so important that when you're in a helping role and someone has trusted you with their mental health concerns, if they're saying things that lead you to think that that could be a consideration, that you directly and explicitly ask that question. Don't shy away from it, because asking that question can and does save people's lives. It's better to ask and to have someone say to you, oh, you're totally off track. I'm nowhere near that point, than not to ask at all. So I wanted to make sure I clarified. If you don't mind moving on to the next slide. Talking about mental health, as I've been speaking about for the last few minutes, can be quite challenging. So I think as we talk about mental health, it's hard to know what to say. So this slide essentially just overviews some of the open-ended questions that you can say to someone who's struggling, whether it's a colleague, an employee, a family member, your child, a friend. These open-ended questions are intended to elicit conversation. So just stating, I'm worried about you. Can we talk about what you're experiencing? So important to ask those open-ended questions. And what I liked about this resource is that it gives you a lot of different sentence starters that you could begin with that would fit your situation. On the next slide, there's content that talks more specifically about how to engage your child in conversations surrounding their mental health. And some of the important talking points here are that you give consideration to the developmental level of the individual that you're speaking with. It's important to communicate in a really clear and straightforward manner, and also to bring up a conversation or to initiate a discussion when your child or another individual really can feel safe and comfortable. And you want to ask that, would now be a good time for us to talk about some things that I've been noticing? during a conversation that can be as sensitive as this conversation, you want to really make sure you're monitoring the individual's response. If they're starting to get flustered or upset, ask if they need a break. Slow down. Ask a clarifying question. If the person you're talking to looks confused or upset, these things can help the conversation to continue to move forward in a positive manner. And if you notice someone is getting defensive or that your questions are not being received in the way in which they're intended, just clarify your intention. I care about you so much. I really, really am not asking these questions for the purpose of upsetting you. I just want to know that you have the supports that you need, or if there's anything that I can do to offer your support. And just as we've said multiple times, listen openly and let people share where they're at. One of the things I learned early on in my practice is that when someone shares something with you, you want to avoid saying, "Oh, I understand. Because the fact of the matter is, you don't understand because you're not that person. You haven't had their life experiences that led them to this moment. You don't know the baggage that they carry with them. So try to avoid saying, "I understand," and instead encourage with things like, "I'm so glad you're sharing this with me. Thank you for trusting me. I'm glad you feel comfortable to be able to open up. I'm here for that. I'm glad to show up for you." Next slide. I'll move forward while we get to the next slide. Ultimately, we want to ensure that people don't feel alone. And that is our goal through our interactions with our clients and students that this crew sees on a regular basis, is to ensure that the people that we support know that there is someone in their corner. So thanks for letting me share with you this evening about how to support. And I will pass on to Nikisha.
Amanda, thank you so much. That was some really great reminders and really useful, practical conversations to have with our employees or our children and the community at a whole and our family. Thank you. All right, so we are almost towards the end for those who have been sticking with us throughout this hour. So this right here that you're looking at is a wellness wheel. This wheel was designed to help you analyze 8 categories that influence directly your level of wellness. So the 10 bars in each category represent how fulfilled you feel about each category. So if you want to take a screenshot of this, I think the slides will also be on the website as well, if I'm not mistaken. But when you get some free time, you want to look through these 8 categories and kind of rate where you are in this moment. So mental wellness, just a little bit, is a little bit like Jenga. Everything is connected and interrelated. If one piece is compromised, the entire system becomes wiggly and under risk of falling apart, right? So this is not something that we really want for ourselves. I don't know about you, but I want my whole body to be well, right? Because when I'm not eating healthy and I'm filling my body with junk, which sometimes happens because I'm in a rush or whatever the excuse may be, I feel tired, and I feel weighed down. If I'm not exercising like I want to do, then it can affect how I sleep, or even how I even love myself, or my own self-esteem and self-image. Okay, so if you can just go to the next slide real quickly. I'm just going to, for a minute, just kind of focus in one area. So let's look at exercise. I want you guys to honestly ask yourself, do you have an exercise routine that works for you And do you exercise regularly? If you were to rate that from 1 being not at all, haven't thought about it in years, to 10, meaning like I have a routine, I never skip a beat. This is something, even on vacation, I still stick to that rhythm. Rate your, take a minute just to rate where you think you are between 0 to 10 when it comes to exercise. If you want, you can put it in the chat on YouTube if you like. Anybody from the panel want to be brave enough to say where you are? You can unmute yourself.
If I'm being totally honest,
Yes.
my entire adult life, I really engaged in a pretty consistent and positive exercise routine. And since the pandemic, I have not participated in exercise in a way that would promote my mental health and well-being. And I miss it. And I have a plan to get back to it this summer over the break from school.
Nice. Nice. Anybody else? One more.
Nikisha, if I had to be honest, this was not for many years, not a highly rated component of my life, despite numerous attempts. But as I grew older and realized kind of some of the physical health challenges within my family tree, and recognizing that nutrition and exercise can really counter some of that, I adopted a much more rigorous exercise routine. And this probably, when I look at this list of 8, is one that I really can say, yes, I do regularly and even on vacations. So it is a priority.
Wonderful. Good for you. So taking care, thank you guys for sharing. Taking care of yourself from head to toe is important. Our physical, our mental, our emotional layers, right? It's all interconnected. If you were, Beth, to have a week where you didn't exercise and you were kind of off of your schedule, do you think that may affect your sleep?
Oh, absolutely. It would affect all of the other 7s without a doubt, because I do rely on exercise to really help with many elements of my life. So probably I rely on exercise maybe too much, I will be honest. But yes, if I went a week without, I would not be bearable to live with.
Great example of my point. So practicing a total body wellness approach can prevent disease. It can improve our alignment and our experience and our overall health, right? It can also be a sleep aid when we're exercising. For those who have trouble sleeping, exercise is also proven to reduce depression as well, especially weightlifting. So if you may have rated yourself maybe not as high as Beth, but maybe you're at a 5 or below, that might be an area, or even if you're just not where you want to be, say I want to be a 9, I want that to be something that fits into my daily life. I want you to ask yourself, is this, exercise doesn't need to be, doesn't have to be forced, doesn't have to be enjoyable, but just ask yourself, what can I do to improve or to achieve this goal? And actually write out a goal for yourself. I want to be able to exercise 3 days a week and improve my overall health, or I want to lower my cholesterol. I want to lower, this is my main goal. So writing out your plan and putting a strategic plan in place allows you to be more successful with your body wellness. So this exercise is something that you guys can do on your own time. It's a real focus on whole body wellness. You can go to the next slide and I'll pass it on to who is next.
All right, and this is my slide. Thank you, Keisha. That was very helpful, and the exercise is an area that I do need to work on, actually. So good. There's been so much good information in here. So I just want to kind of round this up here. We're talking about moving from hopelessness to hopefulness. So oftentimes, if you're going through a mental health issue yourself, or you have a family member or a loved one or somebody close to you that's going through a mental health crisis or has long-term issues with mental health, it could feel pretty hopeless. It could feel like that there's no light at the end of the tunnel and that you don't think anybody could help. I work a lot with families that have maybe loved ones that are struggling with either a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue. And one of the things I always encourage them is that don't give up on them. They're trying. And so I remind them of the assumptions that Christine talked about, and that how those assumptions can lead to frustration and anger and a misunderstanding about what that person's really going through. And as we interact with folks and our family members that are or colleagues, that we need to make sure that we can offer some hope to them, and that there's lots of resources out there for them. And again, if we find ourselves struggling with mental health issues, understand that there's help and that there's hope, and that it might feel very hopeless right now, but there is hope and there is things that you can do to get control of your mental health. And there's some things that you can do to help other people if they're struggling with mental health or substance issues. So we just want to leave on a positive note that there's lots of resources that you can turn to. And again, it's okay to ask for help. And there are people out there to support you with that. So one of the things that we did is we did collect some areas, some resources for folks to share right now. So I'm just going to share a few of those. So most of all, this suicide prevention hotline used every day by thousands of folks. And it also has a chat feature to it. So if you or your loved one are ever struggling with ideation of hurting themselves or suicide, there's immediate help that you can reach. Nikisha's opportunity of kind of finding therapists of color, or the finding therapists that meets your needs. There are specialty groups of therapists that will meet a number of different individual needs and have a number of different approaches to take. NAMI is a great resource. There's all kinds of self-help things on there, and also lists of folks that you can go to that are professionals that can help you with it. Mental Health Matters. There's a number of numbers here that you can turn to. A few more. Teens for Teens. I just recently learned about this group. So it's a group out of California, and they had a daughter that was struggling with her emotions and difficulty with mental health. So the family decided to get together. What they were going to do about it was develop a video series for folks. And so there's our video series that either caregivers can give or teens can look up themselves. It's all been vetted by professionals, and it's all helpful information from folks that are struggling firsthand with some of these issues. And great resource for folks to go to and get a sense from not somebody that that kind of knows about it, but someone who's living it and someone that has been through it and what has helped them. See something, again, reporting systems of you see on the left-hand part of the screen, SAMHSA. There's also a direct, you could kind of scan that in there too, and find resources directly in this site. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I also want to go back to what Beth talked about in EAP programs. I oftentimes feel like that's the least used resource in our toolbox, and many organizations have very good EAP programs that employers may not even know about that, or may not think to turn to that. So EAP is a good kind of first start. So it can give you kind of a list of resources and a list of both self-help tools and professionals that you can go to that you can get help for yourself or a family member. And we just want, lastly, before we get into the questions, just end with a quote from Jim Carrey. It says, "The effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is." And each of us impact people in many different ways that we might not even realize. So that kind word we share with somebody in the break room, that extra effort you make to call an old friend, checking in on your kids, making sure that they seem like they're okay, but maybe that there's really something going on that they don't feel comfortable sharing with you right away. So those are all ways that we can connect with each other. We can support each other. And I'd like to also go back to actually Amanda's questions. What ways do we get help, or what ways can we get help? I know for me, when people take that extra time to either check in on me or just kind of send me an email saying, I really appreciate that project you did, those folks have no idea how much that impacts me and how much that can motivate me and help me, through, I might be having a difficult day and I get something kind of positive encouragement from somebody. And, that could just, touch somebody's life in ways that you might not even understand the impact of that. So we thought we'd end with this quote from Jim Carrey, and that just kind of understand the importance that you play in lives of people that are important to you, lives of people that interact with you, lives of people that you see every day, and lives of people you kind of happenstance run into on the street or in the grocery store. So we all can have an impact on each other, and that mental health is best managed in communities. I heard a study about folks with post-traumatic stress disorder, in particular veterans. And one of the things that they really identified is that the symptoms oftentimes get a lot worse when they come home. So the trauma's gone, and you think that maybe that it would be a better environment for them. And by and large, oftentimes they affect the isolation that they feel is one of the reasons that kind of exacerbate some of their symptoms that they're having. So when they're in the field and when they're going through the stress, or they're going through the battle, that they that they have each other and that they have their colleagues, they know that someone have their back. But when they come, when they leave the battlefield, they don't have anybody that they can count on anymore. And so that isolation becomes problematic and damaging in itself. So with that, we have about 10 minutes, and I think we want to turn it over to questions. And I believe that there are some questions that come up, and there might be some questions people have. So I'm going to have Beth moderate the questions, and the panelists will all take the best stab that we can get at answering any questions that we have from the community.
Thank you. I know Taylor was going to forward some questions. If there were any on the...
Yeah, we covered some of these along, but
okay.
One of them was mental health does not stop after high school, yet the support systems for people with autism stop after high school. What can we do to support those students after college, after high school, and if there's any tips there?
Yeah, I'm not, probably some of you guys who work in the school district would know better, but me coming from the outside, I have seen some of the school counselors or the parents kind of, I guess, kind of transition some of the students into community resources such as like CMU and other services as far as like case management to help with life skills after high school. I know there is a program locally at the CMU, and I believe they start with ages 16 to like 24, if I'm not mistaken, and they help with transitions such as like employment, helping with transportation, even how to navigate through the system, whatever, I guess, individualized needs that the individual or as a group may have. But I'll let someone else speak who's in this school system. Then you guys may have some more resources.
Yeah, Nikisha, I would add to that. CMU is great. And as a school, we often link people up with case management unit. Each county has an agency. In Dauphin County, it's called case management. And it may have a different name in other counties, but there are services and resources that are available as individuals enter into adult world. The Office of Vocational Rehabilitation through the state, often referred to just as OVR, is also another helpful resource. And I would say just keep asking for it, because services are not going to be provided if there's not perceived to be a need out there. One of the things that I often say about COVID brought a lot, and the pandemic brought a lot of brought a lot of challenges to us. But one thing that it did do is it provided a seat at the head of the table for mental health. And so finally, people are kind of acknowledging a little bit that there's a need for mental health. And so the silver lining of the pandemic cloud is that mental health is being talked about right now.
I would also suggest, just to add on to that, that if you have insurance, whether that be state insurance or insurance through your employer, to call the phone number on the back of your card and ask to speak to a representative, and they will actually give you lists of providers in your area that are covered under your insurance. So that's a really wonderful resource for people who have insurance to pursue as well.
I think that's such a powerful question because, autism and our understanding of autism has evolved so much in even my career when I started as a social worker and then now. And again, oftentimes it's thought of as a childhood disorder, but those children grow up, right? And so these folks are just the first kind of generation of adults now, as we have this kind of new understanding of what autism is and what our treatments are. And oftentimes, they've been undertreated or underserved as children. Oftentimes the school districts are very powerful tools, though, for them to get the support they need. And then when they lose that support, they could feel out there on their own. So again, kind of going back to that community support, going back to that kind of looking for resources. And I think that's probably an untapped need in the community that we probably need to take a serious look at, making sure that as young adults and as they grow up to be older adults, that we have the supports and resources for them as well.
Thank you all for answering that question. Just one more question, and Nikisha touched on this a little bit, but if any other panelists would like to expand. Mental health is often seen as different from physical health, but it's important to see that health is interrelated and that issues need to be treated properly. What are the panelists' thoughts on this?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that they are the same, one and the same, just different body parts, right? And so oftentimes, making sure that you take your child or yourself, depending on who it is, and go to the doctor and get a physical. Get your thyroid checked. Your thyroid could wreak havoc on your mental health. Get your vitamin D level checked. Explain to your doctor the symptoms that you're experiencing, and they will give you the tests or the measurements to determine, is it a biological, is there something biologically that could be done to help complement any counseling services that you may receive, and also maybe make recommendation for psychiatry or medication as well.
I also think it's important people can be self-advocates, because if you sign consents and ask for your different providers to consult with one another so that they can team about both your mental health and your physical health conditions, because that's so critical. I know the health systems are overwhelmed right now, and if you're a parent, to be able to advocate for your children, to make sure that there is a multidisciplinary team that is surrounding, both your mental health and physical health providers. If you can advocate, and if not, if you're in a position where you're not able to self-advocate, talk to your therapist. If you have a therapist, how can we do that together to connect with your physical health providers so that there's a sense of approach?
Taylor, did that question ask specifically about the program Mental Health First Aid?
Yep, I was just about to ask that one. So another question was, I found that mental health first aid can be helpful. What do any of the panelists have experience with this technique? So it sounds like maybe if you have anything to add, Amanda.
I know that our pupil services department at one point in time was trained using mental health first aid, and it was a very educational program that I think for people who are interested in learning more about the common signs and symptoms of mental health challenges or substance use challenges, how to interact with people in crisis, how to connect people with help, and just generally learning more about trauma-informed practices and self-care. The mental health first aid approach is a good program that provides that content to many, many, many people.
Thank you. Those were all of our questions, so I will wrap up today's presentation. I want to thank everyone who is joining us on the YouTube stream. I want to thank all of our panelists and our speakers for their work on putting this presentation together. As always, the Hershey Public Library has provided a list of reading list materials to support tonight's topic that will be found in the event description. We will also make sure that this presentation is available. I also would like to thank the Hershey Company for providing our panelists with a gift basket this evening. And please visit HersheyAllThingsDiversity.org for information on all upcoming events. Thank you again and have a great night.
Thank you.